Ridiculous.
Are we all set over there? Okay, great. All right. I'm calling to order the Monday, October 21st, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. I apologize for the delay. We were waiting for a new agenda. So let's get this started with a roll call. It's different than what just was handed to me, but let's start with a roll call vote.
Mr. Wadiska.
Here.
Mr. Rankin.
Here.
Mr. Puentes.
Here.
Ms. Teets.
Here.
Mr. Krasner.
Here.
Ms. Weiss.
Here?
And Mr. Stevens.
Here.
Okay, I'm going to now ask for an adoption of the agenda. However, the one that was put in front of us has us going into a closed session as number 2. I think we're going to go into a closed session after we do the adoption of the agenda. So 2 would be 4B or something? Does that make sense to what everybody has in front of them? You understand? Okay, so,
So we're amending the agenda to do a call to order, the roll call, adoption of agenda, and then closed session.
that's correct.
So I move to do that.
Can I get a second?
I second it.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, that carried. Okay, so we are now going to go into a closed session. I don't have a closed meeting without. Okay. I move that the Planning Commission convene immediately into a closed session as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711.A.19 for purposes of a briefing by staff members and law enforcement concerning actions taken to respond to threats to public safety and information subject to the exclusion in subdivision 2 or 14 of VA Code Section 2.2-3705.2, where discussion in open session would jeopardize the safety of persons using City Hall and the chambers.
Second.
Do we need a roll call vote on this? I believe we do. On
Yes.
this motion?
Yes.
Okay, can I get a roll call vote on this motion?
Mr. Wadiska.
Yes.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mr. Puentes.
Yes.
Ms. Teets.
Yes.
Mr. Krasner.
Yes.
Ms. Weiss.
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
All right, having passed unanimously, we're going to go into closed session. I have to ask, unfortunately, the people in the audience to leave. I've been informed it's about 30 minutes, but I don't know the exact time, and we'll let you know when we're complete. Thank you. All right, we are going to reconvene our meeting. We're just going to wait for the cameras and audiovisual equipment to be back on. So when Paul returns, we will start up again. Paul, we're all set? Okay, great. I move that the Planning Commission, having concluded its closed meeting at 8:20 PM, reconvene in open session.
Second.
We don't have to vote on that part. I move that the members of the Planning Commission certify that to the best of their knowledge, 1, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements under this chapter, and 2, only such public business matters as were identified in the motion by which the closed meeting was convened were heard, discussed, or considered in the meeting by the Planning Commission.
Second that as well.
Can we get do we need a roll call vote for that? A roll call vote?
Mr. Wadiska.
Yes.
Mr. Rankin.
Yes.
Mr. Puentes.
Yes.
Ms. Teets.
Yes.
Ms. Weiss.
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Mr. Krasner.
Okay, great. We are back in business, back and open to business. Have we received any items, receipt of petitions for any items not on the agenda? Okay, great. Okay, the first item we're going to hear is action item 6A, Oak Street Bridge Replacement Design, Public Information Session.
Thank you, Chair Wadiska. This is a public hearing and recommendation by the Planning Commission on the design of a bridge, reconstruction of a bridge along South Oak Street, approximate to the TJ Elementary School. This kind of item, it is on. I think it's just picking up, but not, it doesn't magnify within the room. The item here, this is relatively new for the Planning Commission, but it is a charter authority for the Planning Commission to review and make recommendation on the design of bridges. That's highlighted in the staff report. And I think Mr. Garris will go into more details on the specifics of the funding source and what's required there. But the item, same as any other item before the Planning Commission, the idea is to have a presentation, hold a public hearing, and then make recommendation. Before I take too much of the story away, I'll turn it over to Staff Planner Cameron Garris.
Hello, my name is Cameron Garris. I'll jump right into it before handing it over to Mark Phillips. Staff requests that Planning Commission holds a public hearing and makes a recommendation regarding the design of Oak Street Bridge replacement. Planning staff recommends that the bridge include design features to calm auto traffic, increase pedestrian safety and access, and include decorative elements. Reviewing the design of civic infrastructure is an important role of the Planning Commission under Section 17.5 of the City Charter, which describes a wide range of civic infrastructure projects that require design recommendation from the Planning Commission, including but not limited to bridges. To give some background, the Oak Street Bridge is located at the entrance of Howard E. Herman Park and just north of Thomas Jefferson Elementary School. The bridge supports infrastructure for automobile and pedestrian traffic over Trips Run. It was designed in 1953, and the bridge has been poorly rated in annual inspections for the past 3 years. It is the staff analysis that urban design is an important element of civic infrastructure. Urban design helps to elevate ordinary moments within daily experiences by recognizing opportunity to reimagine a space's potential. Safety and aesthetic design improvements can be achieved simultaneously to create places that people will choose to be in and interact with. Choices of materials and patterns can have a large impact and perceived transformation of an otherwise utilitarian object into a neighborhood feature that adds to the community's character. One design element, such as building height, architectural style, street lamps, bus stops, and bridges, are repeated throughout an area. A sense of place and identity is formed. The report draws upon precedent of a recent bridge project along Route 123 in Fairfax, or City of Fairfax. You can see the before and after pictures of the Van Buren Bridge project, which focuses on the separation of automobile and pedestrian cyclist traffic while accentuating the division through arched stonework. The Van Buren Bridge design also, many of the same elements in the Van Buren Bridge are applicable to the context of the Oak Street Bridge redesign, including designed crosswalks and signage. Actually, we can scroll down a little more to show the staff proposal drawing. To the next page. Designated crosswalk and signage and visual cues to reduce speed. Replacement of the parallel steel and concrete rails above Trips Run with a concrete guardrail with stone imprinted concrete header walls, and the narrowing of lanes to exclude on-street parking and widen sidewalks to create a shorter crossing distance to the entrance of Howard E. Herman Park. The City's Park for People chapter of the Comprehensive Plan establishes a vision for a connected park system throughout the city. Bridges should be seen as a mechanism for establishing and strengthening entrances and connections while providing safe travel for all modes. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Mark.
Thank you for that report. Are we supposed to see what's on the screen on these monitors? Or
Normally we do.
typically, nobody
You're not on.
is able,
No, we don't change.
I mean, I can follow for this purposes, but it appears they are
Couple meetings there now.
not working.
I didn't break the whole thing.
Oh, there you go.
No, we have a security alert.
Well, that's good. You've got the same thing that's up on the screen.
But the-
Whose projector do you have a set of slides up there?
I have a set right here, and they should be on the computer.
Yeah,
I mean, they're on the,
Hmm.
I have them from online.
computers on
You have to be able to
computer
get
running.
to it.
Well, no, we've got it. It's not mine. It's hers. broken the whole thing.
I am too.
Go without slides. Yeah. How many copies do you have? Yeah. We have 3 copies of the slide.
I mean, I have a digital copy as well,
Okay.
so I don't know who else has access to their computers or Wi-Fi, but I got one.
There we go.
You're getting closer.
I can't.
You can join that pause, this little thing there.
I can touch my screen right here.
Just pretend we're in the school board chambers and fix the
Yeah, so I'm plugged in.
I did that, I couldn't make it work.
But for some reason, I didn't miss it.
It was working until Paul broke it?
Yeah, it was working until Paul broke it. That is correct. Let's see, send the selected source to a display.
Just need to hit OK on that.
Let's try this.
And that's not like, you're not plugged into anything.
No.
And this is you,
Does that have a label?
HDMI.
That's what we're messing with.
Unplug that and plug it back in and see if that. Hold on a second, don't let anything. I'll plug it back in. Yeah, we should see if this will.
Well, that seemed to be responsive. That's good news.
Hold on. HDMI 1. Is that one of your, like when you,
Do you have a second desktop?
that's,
You have a
Oh.
second desktop.
I do in my office, but
oh,
it
well,
won't.
this is showing.
But you guys have the same thing. Ooh, that was something, that was good.
See that thing in the bottom? See, if this were a Mac, it's probably, go back into,
There we are.
Do you want me to turn it off?
no,
and
no,
turn
no,
it back on?
No.
That will probably
Let's, hold on a second. Hold on a second. No. We'll go over here. And then we're gonna go, let's
it's
see.
like the second monitor of her computer. So
Yeah.
I don't know,
In
and
my
on a Mac, I
office.
would go to display property,
Well, but it can't be here.
mirror,
Yeah, because I have to be
Mirror
plugged
the-
in.
Windows
Windows
button P.
button P. Windows button P.
Yeah, Windows user will crack.
Whoa, here we go. Oh, huh?
Try-
Oh, I broke it. You duplicate.
This should, basically, your computer thinks there's 2 screens, you want it to just be.
There we go.
Ta-da!
Windows guy.
Oh, no.
I was gonna say okay.
Things,
Hit
you
OK.
have to take,
Yeah, say okay to
Click
that.
OK.
Hit OK. All right, let me make sure this works before we get excited. There we go.
What were we talking about?
All right. Good? All right. Good evening, members of the Planning Commission. Thank you for having us here tonight. My name is Mark Phillips. I'm with Kimley Horn. We're the design consultants working with the city on this bridge replacement project. And I'm the lead engineer on the project. And some of the things I want to go through here, oops, sorry. Meeting agenda, some things we want to go over, the project motivation, why we got to where we are today and why we're working on this bridge, a brief overview of the roadway itself, its current conditions and what's going on out there, the proposed improvements, including the concept plan, and then we want to have a discussion with you all about any other ideas you may have for the project or what we're proposing to do for the bridge, and then any public comments, and then we can go over next steps. So briefly, the purpose of this meeting is to provide project information to the public, let them know what we're planning to do out there,
get any citizen feedback that we can and try to put that into the project, whether it be recommendations from the citizens or from the planning commission themselves. So the main question, why replace the bridge? So as was alluded to with the staff report, the bridge was built approximately in 1953, 1954, so it's fairly old. The structure is in dire need of replacement. The bridge is currently loaded to 15 tons, so they've reduced the load limit from its original 40 tons down to 15 tons because of the damage to the structure. And we have some, here's the project limits. It's approximately a quarter mile south of Route 7, kind of southwest of Route 7, and then about 500 feet north of the Thomas Jefferson Elementary School. And some existing conditions pictures. So these pictures are fairly interesting. We went out and did an emergency bridge inspection on July 16th after that large storm event that happened this summer. You can see what happened to a lot of the pavement out there. The sidewalk actually got undermined and kind of sank down. And we also did an inspection on the bridge to make sure that it was still structurally sound at the 15-ton load capacity, and it was. Since these pictures were taken, there have been minor improvements out there to make it roadworthy again, and it is operable. So some other things with existing conditions. So this is on the annual inspection. It gets inspected annually right now through VDOT's bridge inspections. We went out there on January 21st and did a bridge inspection, and then did the emergency inspection this summer based on that storm event that happened. So the proposed improvements with this project, we're going to be obviously replacing the existing bridge with a concrete span girder bridge. We will be lengthening the bridge about approximately 2 feet on either side because currently the existing bridge constricts on the culvert, so it actually constricts the flow of water coming from the existing culvert under the bridge. We'll be widening it to allow better flow of the stream from Trips Run. We'll also be making some surface improvements, widening sidewalk, putting in architectural treatments, and kind of narrowing the roadway down to have a road diet traffic calming effect. I'll kind of skip here to the conceptual rendering. This kind of tells the story from above of what we're actually looking to do here. We'll be putting in new pedestrian ramps to cross to the trail that kind of follows parallel to Trips Run, pedestrian crossing signage. You notice that the roadway narrows there. We put in approximately 6 foot wide sidewalks. What's out there today is about 4 feet wide. So we'll be widening those sidewalks, narrowing the road, hopefully reducing traffic speeds because this is in the vicinity of an elementary school. So it'd be crucial to get some traffic calming in this area. During construction, we are proposing to close the bridge completely, so there would be a detour plan. This would be very similar to what happened when the bridge was closed for the emergency repair that was done this summer. As you can see, anyone who lives along Oak Street north of the bridge would have to go out onto Route 7, make a left, and then make another left onto South Spring Street to then make their way back down. And vice versa, if you live south of the bridge on Oak Street, you would have to take a left on Timber Lane, right on Parker Avenue, and then come up Spring Street onto Route 7. And then kind of a good example that was brought up earlier is the Van Buren Bridge replacement, what we're looking for in terms of a design. So you can see the before and then the after of what they did. We really want to kind of create consistency throughout the city, and this is kind of the new, I guess, premier bridge type that you can put in for a lot of these replacements and do this throughout the city on any others that need it. But putting in the architectural treatment, the painted treatment, concrete bridge span, and using that throughout the city. To project schedule, we're here tonight at the public hearing. We're continuing to work on the 60% plan design, and we plan on completing that and submitting that in March. 90% design would then be completed around August, and then get into right-of-way acquisition near the end of next year, in August through November 2020, and then completing final design after that. And our plan is to begin the construction phase in the spring of 2021, hopefully getting a contractor underway for the summer of 2021 to complete it by the end of the year, beginning of 2022. And at this time, if you have any questions, be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Do we have questions? Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, the Van Buren Street Bridge that was recently completed, that has speed bumps on it. Are there speed bumps planned?
No, there are no speed bumps planned currently.
Okay, that resolves my issue because the Van Buren Street Bridge is not ideal from a bicycling standpoint because of those speed bumps. There's like a little tiny groove there, and you gotta be very accurate to get through there
get through.
without going over a speed bump. So the fact that there's not speed bumps, it should be bicycle friendly as well as pedestrian friendly as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. White?
I have a couple of questions, if that's all right. But first a comment, because I walk over there all the time, and
Yeah.
this looks 1,000 times better than what used to be there, and it just seems like it'll be a lot safer, so very positive first impressions. This is the first public hearing on this bridge? I guess my question is on what the process is to engage the neighbors and all the people who live over there. What has happened thus far, or what will happen?
So I guess I'll look to the city. I don't know what's been done previously, but
I'm Sue Long, I'm the project manager for the city on this project, and Kimley Horn's been doing a great job with the design. When we get
Can
closer.
you just step up to the mic,
Sure.
please?
When we get closer to construction, we'll do some more neighborhood engagement. This is the first step, and we wouldn't expect a lot of input from neighbors on the engineering, sort of the underside of the bridge, that kind of design. But when we get closer to having to close the road and do a detour, we'll certainly do some more public engagement.
Just one question on the engagement. I saw in the staff report that there was a guardrail on the side with the home, but it's not
Yes.
here. So are you, where, will there be
So
a guardrail on that home
we,
side? or-
we modified the original rendering to remove that guardrail because it's not needed. There's no drop off there or anything, and it lessens the impact and the construction cost. There was the idea that the guardrail and the architectural treatment could be put in for the future planning that maybe Trips Run gets opened up and becomes an open stream. And if that is the case, then we could propose to put that back in. But at this time, when we were doing the design, there's no need for it under its current condition, so we did not propose it.
And my last question is, what happens to this bridge in the next 100-year storm?
Well, the bridge would operate well and it would be able to handle the flow. The problem is actually the upstream culvert that cannot handle these flows during these large storms, and it's actually overtopping and coming down. And when we went out there and did the emergency inspection, we actually saw a lot of the plantings and fences were damaged coming through and actually traveled over the roadway, and that's why it damaged all the pavement that was on top of the existing bridge. The way we'll design the bridge today would be to handle that expected overtopping that could happen because of the upstream culvert that we can't control. But this will be helping the flow by at least widening the existing bridge slightly. We'll be getting about 4 feet wider than what the existing bridge that is out there today.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
One question.
Yep, Mr. Krasner?
You mentioned as part of the schedule, right-of-way acquisition. How much right-of-way do we need? Is that just for the easements, the temporary construction easements, or is there more?
Correct. As of now, we just believe we need temporary construction easements. We don't believe we need any actual fee simple right of way.
Okay, yeah, that was my question. I thought we had enough for what the
Correct.
width is. Yeah, okay.
Anything else?
I have a few questions.
Yeah.
So you mentioned there aren't currently daylighting plans, but if 5 years from now there becomes one and we hadn't done a guardrail, is it retrofittable, or are we like, oh my gosh, we gotta build a new bridge?
Yes, you could retrofit it.
All right. And then, unlike the Van Buren Bridge, this one, I don't even know where the actual culverted stream ends, but I assume we've thought about that challenge in terms of constructing a bridge.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, there's no, like you said, there's, on the one side of the bridge, it's just land, and then there's
Right.
stream coming out, so I assume we've figured out how to, like, we're not gonna damage that, or.
Correct. So we did some very detailed survey to get underneath the culvert and through our inspection to tie to the existing culvert and make sure that we don't damage it when we're replacing the existing bridge and to put in the new one.
And then I question, I like the idea of narrowing it, but I saw someone mention, school buses go through here a lot, and people park, and there's an intersection right there. I would say it wouldn't hurt to check in with a couple of bus drivers to ask them what they think about narrowing there, and if that could potentially create a problem for them, because it would be unfortunate to learn that after we build it. I do think that detour, the turning left onto Broad Street, having done that before, is a disaster. Most people will actually go up the other street where there's a light, Lee, I guess. So you should be aware that the neighbors over there are going to comment about that. I don't think very many people will go up to Broad and wait forever to turn left. There is a light pole right there in that sidewalk. If that becomes part of your construction thing, is there any way to put that light pole in the grass? A light pole in a sidewalk is just like, or put it in the street,
Yeah, the
basically put
power
it
pole, I
anywhere
don't
on
know
the
if we-
sidewalk.
No. Expensive.
But I'm saying if, it's hard to tell, if that's part of the construction site, you're gonna have to move the light pole anyway. All right, well, if they can do it without, that's fine, but if they end up having to, just don't put it back in the sidewalk.
Correct.
It's like, anywhere
Yes.
else would be better, even in the street. And then, it wasn't clear to me, are you saying that this road will be closed for 11 months?
We think it'll be approximately 4 to 6 months of the road closure to construct the bridge. And then once the bridge is in place, they can open the bridge up while they finish other parts of the project.
All right, and then, the Van Buren Bridge took forever and was closed for a really long time. I don't have, this is probably not, unless you guys did that one too, but, I assume we learned some lessons there, or that, because that was one thing, this bridge being closed for more than 4 to 6 months is going to be miserable. So I would say whatever, even if it costs more to make sure it's done faster, that's a worthwhile investment. And then.
I believe the Van Buren thing was a contractor issue.
Okay, well, are we gonna have a contractor issue on this? I mean,
Yeah.
so whatever it was.
Well, I don't think there was a equipment issue.
Okay, are we gonna have
I
an
asked
equipment
about it
issue
at
on
the
this one?
time.
That's what I'm saying, buy better equipment. I mean, the Van Buren thing was a disaster anyway, but it would be a real disaster here if this thing was down for.
Well, the neighbors on
maybe-
Spring Street are gonna take the extra traffic, because Oak Street gets a fair bit of, people going all the way through down to the light, 29 and further beyond, and so
Yeah.
Spring Street's already pretty sensitive to traffic on their street on South Spring, so I imagine they'll have something to say about it.
I
Yeah,
actually
and,
thought this might be good to kind of like put a break on that cut-through traffic for a while.
and then you mentioned, I mean, I appreciate what you're saying about involving the neighbors before the actual shutdown, but I think some neighbors would love to, even if they're not gonna have much input on what it looks like, I think having one meeting like this, where someone could say like, oh, I like that or don't like it, could be valuable, because if all we're notifying the neighbors of is, hey, it's gonna be closed down now, they're not really participating in the process of designing the bridge. But I don't know how hard that is to pull together. But if this were like if this were like a different kind of construction project, you'd have to notify the immediate neighbors, right? Or some radius of neighbors, not just post in the newspaper?
Depending on the application type, yes. I think the point that's being made is that the newspaper ads were run, the city's electronic media forums were run. Certainly, the public meeting here at the Planning Commission is an advertised public meeting. So I think the intent was to use the existing tools. that are
Okay,
available
but we
to
didn't
notify.
specifically notify the immediate neighbors,
Directly?
like we do on other,
Like on traffic comment.
get a letter.
This is-
I got a
this is
letter
just
every
some-
time they're gonna close the road for the 5K, for example. We didn't do any of that.
No, I think for this style of project, often the kind of
Yeah.
direct communication is done much closer to implementation.
Yeah.
All right, I suspect some people will be unhappy about that. That's all I got.
Anything else? I just want to just talk about the schedule a bit. This strikes me as not a very aggressive schedule. This takes a very long time here that we don't think this is going to be finished for 2 years or so. What's the rationale behind some of these durations? It just does, it seems like it's going to take a long time just before we even get underway, and I just want to get a better understanding of that.
And some of the time that's built in there is the design. So if you look at 60% plan design, October 2019 to March 2020, what we build into there is the time for VDOT to review these. Once we design the plans, finish them, we have to submit them to VDOT, and VDOT gets a 90-day, 3-month window to
I
review
see.
them and get us
Okay.
comments. And then in order for us to move to the next phase, we have to address all their comments. So we have to build in time to get through each phase. So the 60, 90, and 100% design phase, we have to submit to VDOT each time, get their comments, address them, and then resubmit.
So is this, I don't want to say worst-case scenario, but this is giving a lot of flow to this. So if you submit a design, they say that looks good, it's similar to what you did at Van Buren, it meets the structural requirements or whatever their comments are, that we could potentially shortchange this somewhat significantly? I mean, I'm not asking you to promise that, but this seems like it's got a lot of built in. Now I understand it. That makes a little bit more
Correct,
sense.
yes.
But is your view that this is realistic or more conservative?
I think we were somewhat conservative on it. However, there is the fact that we would want to go to construction during a certain season, at least to where the majority of the construction is over the summer, so not when school's in session. So if we found ourselves completing 100% design in the winter, we still may want to wait to actually get the project started until April or May, just to avoid impacting traffic as much as possible. So,
Okay, that makes sense to me. Do we expect a lot of comments from VDOT on this? I mean, it's like residential, does anybody know about the Van Buren? I don't. Did we get a lot of comments on that one? Is that, did VDOT have a big
yeah, I
problem
mean,
with this?
it's just typical VDOT. You're guaranteed to get some, no matter what, so, but.
Is this a standard design? I mean, it seems to be now our standard design. Is this something that we're seeing elsewhere as?
It is fairly standard. However, it still doesn't seem to speed up the process, whether it's standardized or not, unfortunately, from what we've
Interesting.
seen.
Okay. And VDOT requires a 60, 90, and 100%.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's standard in design practice. I understand that, but for something like this, it feels like we could do an over-the-shoulder review in about a minute. But, all right.
Yeah. And they also require this public hearing, so that's why.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not upset about the public hearing. I mean, I need a job, right?
You're getting paid that
No, I'm not. It sounded good, though. I don't have any other questions. Anything else?
This does need to be opened as a
Yep.
public hearing item.
Okay. So I don't have any questions. Looks like the commission doesn't, so let me open it to the public for anyone who wants to make comments on this. Okay. Sir, have you filled out a speaker slip? Okay, well, if you just state your name and address, that's sufficient.
My name is Michael Case. I am a resident at 208 South Oak, just north of where this bridge will be going in. I am absolutely in favor of them replacing this bridge. I so far like the design. I like where they're heading with it. I do also have a concern about where the utility pole is. So I'd like to make sure there's at least a 4 to 5 foot room to move a stroller through there, because they do have children. I do like the narrowing of the bridge. That road is actually fairly wide for a residential road, and it actually is a very fast road due to the location of that hill. So having a narrowing there is definitely preferable. We do have concerns about making sure that access is maintained to the school during all school is in session. So yes, if you need to delay this thing 6 months to put it in over the summer, that would definitely be preferable to me. To answer one of your questions earlier, no, I did not get notified. I found this in the paper. Overall, again, I like the design. I think it's a good idea. Definitely needs to be done. I do hope you guys consider keeping the truck prohibition on Oak Street even after the bridge is upgraded to current standards. And other than that, just had some technical questions for the team that they answered while I was out.
Oh, you're in.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I appreciate you coming and speaking to us. Sir, your name and address and. Tim uses every trail. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, I think those are two, we heard a couple of really good suggestions. Mr. Rankin mentioned it about the poll, and obviously one of our speakers did as well. I know there's some cost associated with that, but when we're redoing a sidewalk or this type of bridge, to have a pole in the middle of the sidewalk doesn't seem to make sense to me. We've been trying as a city to promote proper sidewalk design, and it seems to, if there's an opportunity in any way to move that out of the sidewalk, I think that's something really important to look into. It is right, I mean, it's currently right in the middle, and it looks like it's not going to be much improved. The idea of a hawk crossing, I don't think is add that much expense to this. And based on the fact that it does have those ramps, I think it invites crossing at those locations, and I think that's a really good suggestion to consider. And, you know, we heard about the schedule. I think you guys made comment to that we wait during the proper time. That makes sense to me if things are delayed. I agree that will be a real headache if we can, if we're doing the construction in the middle of the school year. So no other questions. Or no other comments. I'm gonna close it to the public. And we have to make a recommendation. Let me call that up here. Whoops. It is a long motion. It's not so bad. We've done worse. Come on. But I will entertain one, and then we can talk about if there's any issues we want to add in terms of the poles and the hawk signal and stuff like that. But someone please make a motion for this item. Not all at once. Anybody?
I'll make a motion.
All right. Mr. Grasner, go for it.
All right. And before I start, I will say, the more I heard you talking about the pole, the more I agree. I mean, if we're going to spend city money on a project and build a new sidewalk around an existing pole in the middle of the sidewalk, I mean, it's just, there's no excuse for that. I mean, we see that all throughout the city where we have these, poles in the middle of sidewalks. It's horrendous from a, today's urban design perspective. And it's okay to say, okay, well, it's been there and it's a function of a sidewalk being widened in 1970, but in 2019, 2020, 2022, I don't see how we could do it. I understand the cost, but I think we need to seriously look. The city council makes a lot of noise about pedestrian accessibility. We do too. And to leave a utility pole smack dab in the middle of a brand-new sidewalk and a brand-new bridge project, and you see it in your beautiful rendering here. I don't mean to, belabor this point, but if you see it in that beautiful rendering, the bridge looks great, sidewalk looks great, big pole in the middle doesn't look so great. It just stands out like a sore thumb, and I understand dollars and cents, but if we need to, make our point to city council that it's a priority, whatever we can do to do that. So, with that said, I'm gonna add that recommendation into the motion from what's printed here, to add that the pole be relocated outside of the sidewalk as part of our recommendation. And we'll see if I get the support on that motion. So, with that long preamble, whereas the city charter provides for the planning commission to make recommendations on the design of bridges in the city, and whereas the design of bridges is important to community character in addition to providing transportation needs for pedestrian and bicycle traffic as well as automobile traffic, and whereas having a pole in the way of pedestrian traffic would be a negative, whereas South Oak Street is a major pedestrian route for accessing Thomas Jefferson Elementary School, connects to the city's recently restored Howard E. Herman Stream Valley Park, and Oak Street Bridge Cross Trips Run, one of the city's two watersheds, and whereas the recent Van Buren Bridge project provides a good example of design features to be included in future bridge projects in the city. Now therefore, I move that the Planning Commission recommends that the Oak Street Bridge be designed to include the following elements: 2 travel lanes, 1 in each direction without additional room for on-street parking on the bridge, wider pedestrian sidewalks on each side of the installation of a bench on the east side of the bridge, installation of a wider sidewalk to connect to the connector trail to the Howard E. Herman Stream Valley Park, and a crosswalk providing access to the trail from the west side of South Oak Street, decorative guardrails on both sides of the bridge that mimics the design of the Van Buren Bridge with the modification that the decorative stone stamp be on both sides of the guardrail. We didn't talk about that, but okay. And I'll add a number 5, that the existing utility pole located within the sidewalk be moved outside of the new widened sidewalk to facilitate pedestrian accessibility along South Oak Street.
Can I get a second, and then we can discuss, all right. Does anyone have a comment regarding the poll addition? Let me first start and say I fully support that. I know there's some dollars and cents, it sounds like it will be associated with that, but I think it is a big point that we've made as a planning commission that's, would only be consistent with what we've said in the past. And I do want to understand just the motion as written. Number 4 says decorative guardrails on both sides of the bridge. I thought we heard that that was only on one side, unless I'm missing, maybe it's talking about the same side on both sides of it?
That's
So,
what, I read what was in the
no,
suggested
you,
motion.
you did. I'm just, I want to make sure I understood it, because I think we're only on one side. One side, so I got that right. So, I would say if we should make a friendly amendment not to say both sides.
I'm
because
sorry.
it's confusing.
Apologize. Okay, I will, no, I'll amend that then.
No, you read it as presented. Any other discussion on the poll, Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, certainly
Or anything
support adding, moving the poll, but obviously, this discussion will be much better informed by having a specific estimate from Dominion and everything that goes into that. I suppose that's presumed to be in there, but, they can be pretty sobering sometimes in terms of what they come up with. So, that's certainly a piece of information that'll be necessary.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the satellite images, the poles are in the sidewalk all the way up the street. It's not that this will solve one of the many poles. I just think as a recommendation, as a planning commission, it's an important part of
Right,
that
well, it's
recommendation.
the thing, it's when you have the opportunity and you're
Exactly.
working in that area and the city's doing it, I mean, because with that attitude, then they would never be moved. You have to take it one by one when you have the chance. It may be difficult to move others, but we're spending presumably millions of dollars on this bridge. Let's look at it holistically. If we're focusing on this little quadrant of South Oak Street, let's try to make it as good as it can be.
I couldn't agree more. Anybody else? Yeah, Ms. Wise?
I just have a question about the scope of the recommendation. It's on the design of the bridge, but we've had some interesting conversation about more public engagement at an earlier basis of the neighbors and those who will be affected by the detour. And somebody's made an excellent point about scheduling this during the summer so it doesn't conflict with kids getting to school. Is there any room for the planning commission to make recommendations that there be additional public consultation and make a recommendation on the schedule, or is that beyond the scope of this current decision?
I'm going to defer to staff on that. I don't.
So I think the question is how far can the planning commission go and what can it touch on in the recommendations? I certainly think that could be a recommendation to staff to hold another session. I don't know that it would figure into the specifics of the design of the bridge, but certainly the way the project is conducted, I think it would be helpful to have that feedback.
Would we amend this in any way, or just you've taken the comments and?
I think this is a question to the project staff in terms of what kind of a session could be held, and maybe it informs, beyond maybe the normal door hanger that goes on. Maybe there is a community meeting where there is a pop-up tent thrown up, and we talk about the bridge design for an hour or two on a particular day of the week. I think that could be a fairly low-cost investment in terms of staff time, but a high-value engagement tool, or maybe it's held at the farmer's market or some such thing.
I hear the planners hang out at the park once a month, right?
During National Community Planning Month, and it is infrastructure is the theme for this year's National Community Planning Month, so it would be appropriate.
Yeah, I mean, the bridge, just to tie it into when I was the liaison to the CACT, when you do traffic calming measures, you do this kind of outreach. Because of the narrowing, I think it almost would fall into the traffic calming category, perhaps. As you said, I think it gives you a lot of goodwill in the community and then relatively little staff time to hear their suggestions and their input in a way outside of this meeting. So I think that's a really good recommendation for staff to pursue it. I'm not sure, again, if it gets in this motion. It sounds like it doesn't, but I think it's a good suggestion for sure. Any other comments about the motion? All right. So my only, before we vote on it, just my request is you accept the friendly amendment related to the guardrails on one side of the bridge. I don't know, is it west, east? I don't know which, or north, south? South, yeah, east, I guess. Okay. So decorative guardrails on the southeast side of the bridge. Okay.
Yeah, I amend my motion to, as stated, to only on the southeast side for the decorative guardrail.
Okay. If no other comment, then let's have a roll call vote on this.
Mr. Wadiska?
Yes.
Mr. Rankin?
Yes.
Mr. Puentes?
Yes.
Mr. Stevens?
Yes.
Mr. Krasner?
Yes.
Ms. Weiss?
Yes.
Ms. Teets?
Yes.
Okay. And it's not part of the motion, but I would like to just add, I hope that we look at the the hawk signal on the crosswalk area. I think it just makes sense, but that'll be, I'm sure, dealt with as the whole budget is considered, and it seems like a good safety element. All right. Let's move on to item 6B, approval of the October 7th, 2019 minutes. Ooh, you're going to bring it up for us, right? Thank you for your time. The bridge looks really nice.
I still think suspension bridge would be a mini Golden Gate, like a Golden Gate replica.
You didn't suggest that, come on.
You missed that moment.
Okay, the approval of the October 7th, 2019 minutes. There were 5 of you present and 2 of us absent. Any comments about these minutes from those who were present?
They look good to me.
Yeah, they do to me as well. I'll move that we approve the October 7th, 2019 minutes.
I'll second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those not, all those abstaining, aye. 2 abstentions, myself and Mr. Puentes, and everybody else approved of them. Well done. No comments. All right, so we now have a speaker. Make sure I'm doing everything in order.
Information items.
No, we're gonna move that.
Oh, we moved it.
We did not move that as part of our adopted agenda. Can I get a motion to further amend the agenda so that we can hear from Mr. Cristile? Is that
I
pronounced
move
right?
that we flip items 7 and 8 and do the, 7 and 9, sorry, and do the speaker series first.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. I appreciate your patience and making the effort. I heard you had another commitment tonight, which you rushed from, so I appreciate it very much, you making the time for us.
Thanks for having me. Let's see how I can operate this.
I think we've got the slides over here if you just want to call for the.
Sure. So thanks for having me tonight. My name is David Cristile. I'm the housing director from your neighbor to the east, Arlington County, Virginia. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think I'm going to share with you, Paul asked for me to talk about how we implement the Affordable Housing Master Plan, which essentially is one of our elements of the comprehensive plan of the county. So I'm going to talk about the plan and the process, talk about what the supply goals are, talk about implementation. I think Paul wanted me to talk about some of the implementation tools that we have, both from a finance perspective, we have some money, and then we have the land use tools, which are, kind of planning and zoning tools. So, and then some examples and kind of lessons learned, and then I think what's most important is, or interesting is questions or comments from you all after I finish. So I'll try and go through this relatively quickly. If there's any questions, feel free to stop me.
Just to interrupt there, I'm sorry for not giving this a proper introduction. This is, of course, part of the Planning Commission Speaker Series, where the group hears from outside experts on topics of interest to the city, but perhaps aren't an active application in front of the commission. Housing, of course, is an important topic within the region as well as across the country. COG, the Council of Governments, recently adopted new housing targets for the entire region in terms of housing supply, both number of units as well as the cost of those units that are available for people moving in. Arlington County has been a leader in affordable housing. They're one of the few jurisdictions in the region, if not the only one, that has a specific affordable housing chapter or element within its comprehensive plan. And I think as the slides will show tonight, it really is quite amazing what Arlington has been able to pull off in terms of the range of resources they've brought to bear on this, as well as their progressive outlook on why housing is important for an entire community, and then the kinds of projects that Arlington has been able to implement, whether that's through preservation or construction of new units. So I really appreciate David being here to talk to the Falls Church community tonight. And of course, this session is recorded so that even if people can't be here tonight to see it, it is something that is available in the city's planning library online, and people can always catch it at a later date. Thank you, David.
Thanks. I guess another part of the introductions, I've been in Arlington, I've been working for them since 2004, so I've got this kind of 15-year snapshot onto the county. Before that, I was in North Carolina for about a dozen years, and then graduate school, and then in Chicago as an organizer back in the 1980s. So I've been around a few blocks, but again, I think I'm kind of not really new to the area, but I think I've been here long enough to develop some opinions in terms of sort of what we've done kind of ourselves, but also in the context of, this is, you and us, we're part of a larger region that's got the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Northern Virginia. That's kind of a dynamic region that's been changing a lot. So first of all, the county vision, kind of a foundation. Back in I think it was the early 2000s, before I got there, the county board adopted this vision about this notion of Arlington being diverse, inclusive, and sustainable. And so that's really the kind of sort of a policy vision foundation that we use, that kind of the master plan, the Affordable Housing Master Plan, and other comprehensive plan elements kind of emanate from. Next. Kind of a core question of sort of why is the government involved in housing affordability, affordable housing? And it's really kind of three, and this is kind of, we spent a lot of time talking about this in kind of leading up in the process about doing the plan. And really, it kind of starts with the economy, that there's this idea that a healthy housing market, which has market rate housing, but also housing that's affordable to folks that don't earn much, is really part of the strength. It kind of helps the economy out. So if you've got a wide range of employees, daycare workers, fast food workers, waitresses, teachers, fire officers, and then the people that also earn a lot of money, a housing market that houses those types of employees is really good to the economy. The second thing is, we think, again, in terms of and I've seen this in kind of my work, is that if you do it right, if you invest the sufficient resources, and you make housing that's affordable, lasts long, looks well, is built well, kind of like the bridge you had up here before, it looks really good. If you do that, it really strengthens the community. And then finally, kind of the more obvious and direct route is that providing affordable housing for a wide range of employees actually helps a lot of people. So those are kind of three reasons why why affordable housing is important. Kind of interesting, you talked about engagement. We do that a lot in Arlington. So when we started out this planning process, we talked to a lot of people. People that are tenants that are trying to figure out how to stay around. We talked to neighborhood associations and community people. We talked to developers. We talked to employers. We talked to a lot of people as we were kind of going through the process. We had information. We had consultants that gave us all this data. We also wanted to make sure that as we were acquiring data, starting to analyze it, that we also had pretty good conversations with the community as we were kind of getting to the plan adoption. I'm going to go through a couple series of findings. This is probably not unique to us, but partly what is driving us is that we're really losing affordability, and this is the kind of the graphic that we've used going forward since about 2000 to over the last 20 years. We've actually lost about almost 14,000 affordable units. Most of these units are not the income restricted ones, but they're simply the market rate affordable units that were just, they're just regular garden style apartments that over the years, as the housing market got heated up and values increased, the rents went up too. So it's not necessarily that those units were lost, demolished, or redeveloped, it's just that the rents went up. But we've got a pretty significant loss. And then the yellow line, the yellow line there are those are the units that we work with, that we income restrict through our finance tools or our land use tools. So I guess if there's a good news story there is that we've actually we've continued year after year after year to adding to that affordable stock that's income restricted. Next. On the ownership side, I think this is something that back 20 years ago we didn't have to worry much about. You can see on the left-hand side, single-family homes, townhouses, and even condominiums were relatively affordable, but over the last 20 years, again, the same thing, and I think you know that here. Certainly on the single-family side and townhouse side, those prices have gotten very expensive. And so that's kind of another second issue that we've kind of addressed. So next. So we've got, the plan has 3 goals. It's increase the supply, improve access to housing, and make sure that the housing that that we're supporting, either through expenditures or land use changes, really helps sustain the community. But I'm going to focus here on the rental goal. We've got a supply goal, we've got a rental goal, and a home ownership goal. We're trying to get to the point where in 2040, about 17.7% of the housing stock is affordable to households earning roughly, in today's dollars, about $65,000 per year. So you can think of a lot of people, employees that earn that kind of living. That's who we're trying to help. It translates to about 600 units per year if we're going to be successful. On the ownership side, if we want to try and meet the ownership needs of people earning in that kind of more moderate income level, roughly in our language, it's 80 to 120% of the area median income. That translates to about $70,000 to $150,000 in terms of what kind of salary that provides. We want to try and get every year where there's new housing produced, that about 1 out of 3 or 4 of those units are affordable to that income range. So those are the 2 supply goals. That translates to about 100 units per year. So in total, we're trying to add 700 units of housing that's affordable to people earning somewhere between 0 and 120% of the area median income, or very low incomes up to $150,000. So those are pretty ambitious goals. And how we plan to get there is we've got essentially 2 sets of tools that I think are somewhat consistent with most jurisdictions that have been in the housing, kind of trying to preserve affordability or create affordability over the years. First is the finance tools, and I'll go through these. The Affordable Housing Investment Fund is essentially the city putting general fund, putting tax dollars into a trust fund that we then loan to developers, either for-profit or nonprofit, and then they either produce or they preserve affordable housing. The second thing is we have rental assistance. The sort of most common form is the Federal Housing Choice Voucher Program, but we also have a housing grants program that's locally funded. I mentioned the federal sources, the excuse the acronyms. We're not supposed to put these in here, but if I wrote them out, the slide would run on to 3 or 4 slides. But anyhow, LIHTC is the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program. It's a federal program that was a result of the Tax Reform Act in 1986. Essentially, it provides equity for income-restricted rental properties. It's a federal program that's administered by the state. In this case, it's the Virginia Housing Development Authority administers that program. Provides a lot of equity that we use in conjunction with our trust fund. CDBG is Community Development Block Grant. It's a federal program that's been around for a long time. Cities, counties, states use it for a lot of sources. We have a partnership with Falls Church right now. I think the Falls Church gets funds from us. Home program is another federal program from the U.S. Department of Housing and Development, also used for housing production. And then HCV is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. This is the federal rental assistance program that the county gets money from to use. These other 2 sources, the Transit-Oriented Affordable Housing Fund, we went through a planning study along Columbia Pike back in I think it was the mid-2012, 2013. And one of the issues that was raised during that study was the cost of infrastructure. This transit-oriented affordable housing fund essentially is for along the Columbia Pike corridor, and it pays for infrastructure that's associated with developments, rental developments along Columbia Pike. It's financed through a tax increment finance district that's along Columbia Pike, so part of the increased tax revenue goes into a fund, and that fund is what we use to help finance developments. And then finally, the county has the ability to issue bonds through its Industrial Development Authority. So those are the main financing tools. I think for us, we spend, I think this year in our fiscal '20 budget, it's about $16 million went into our trust fund, and then about $9 million into housing grants. So that's about $25 million of local money right into housing assistance. I think that's roughly about 5% of our budget. This is switching gears to our trust fund a little bit. One of the good things about it, it's been around since 1985, and it's not a grant, it's a loan fund. So we make the loans. They're soft pay loans, meaning they're not hard pay, but if there's cash flow from the development, we get part of that cash flow that goes back into our development, back into the trust fund. And as you can see in this fiscal year we're talking about, we're looking at about $1 out of $5 that goes into the trust fund is from loan repayments. We get developer contributions through our land use tools, and that's about 14%, and then the rest of it's an allocation. So we got $16 million a year, but we're forecasting about almost $25 million a year from other sources that'll go into this fund. Next. These are our land use tools. I think it's, at least we've been in business for a long time, so I think we've had I'm not sure, luck isn't the right word, but we were intentional about understanding that's not just money that gets affordability, it's also land use tools. And so in 2004-05, there was a requirement added to our zoning ordinance that says if you're going through what we call our special exception site plan process, 4.1, there's a number of community benefits that you need to provide in order to go through that process. You get additional development rights, and in return, there's an affordable housing requirement. It's either on-site units, off-site units, or cash. There's a formula that I'll go through in a little bit. Other land use tools, we've got something called bonus density, so that even in addition to the ordinance, if you want to get more density, that's as long as it's within the general land use plan and it's up, you've got more, you can go higher, you can get bonus density. We also have some other tools. One is a special affordable housing protection district, which was created. It's created a long time ago, but it says that if you're going to take existing garden apartments and tear them down, you've got to replace them either on a bedroom or a GFA or a unit place. Most of these areas are along the metro corridors. Trying to think what else. We've got transfer development rights, which means that we use this, it's eligible throughout the county, but we've got 2 apartment complexes along Columbia Pike that say if the owner wants to preserve those units, rather than tear them down, they can actually sell their development rights to somebody who needs additional density, and then in return for the density that they would sell, they'd have to preserve those, they'd have to keep those units affordable for 30 years. Hasn't been used much, except in some fairly narrow circumstances. Form-based code along Columbia Pike. This is something where we had a commercial form-based code along the commercial areas, and then we did a housing study and created this form-based code. Inside the form-based code, there's a housing requirement, so that if they go through the form-based code process, from 20 to 30% of the net new units have to be affordable for a period of 30 years, and that's been kind of working, fairly well along the Pike. We've also recently one of the most expensive things about development is below-grade parking, and so this idea, if we can right-size parking for affordable developments, we can actually reduce the costs, and so we've got lower parking ratios for affordable developments. There's not, so it's just that it helps it make it more affordable. In 2008, we had an accessory dwelling ordinance that was adopted. Got a lot of feedback on that ordinance, and so we allowed in-unit dwelling units, but not new ones. It got adopted. I think we had about a couple dozen, actually about a dozen or so we didn't work very well. So we went back twice last year, and now we expanded the existing footprint or existing square footage you could do internally, and then we also added that you could do detached accessory dwellings as well, and hopefully that will incentivize more folks, more people to do this. And then finally, lastly, the Housing Conservation District is a district that we set up a couple years ago with the hopes of trying to preserve existing market rental units that are in our unplanned areas, and about 7,000 units. And so right now, we're kind of going through the study period to figure out what kind of land use tools, what additional development rights we have to try to propose in order to incentivize the preservation of these market rate affordable units. Next. I'm getting a little bit into the details of the land use, the zoning ordinance. This is on our website, but again, either on-site, it's 5% of the gross floor area above the 1.0 threshold for this. Off-site nearby, it's 7.5%, or elsewhere in the county, it's 10%. And there's also a cash contribution, and this is a developer's choice. If they come through our process, they can choose whether to do on-site units, off-site units, or cash. Because the way the ordinance was structured back in 2004, it's easier or more feasible for them to write us a check than to put the units on site. So we've kind of had some, we're probably figuring as the master plan, we revisit that. This is the ordinance. We may look at it and see if it needs to be adjusted. And you can see the contributions rates up there. Next. And I think that this is important is that essentially going over the last 8 years, if you look at our production of income-restricted units, we've got about 80% of those have been supported through our finance tools and largely our trust fund, but 20% have been supported through the land use tool. So I think it's important to understand that it's not just money that helps affordability, but also we've been successful in our land use tools as well. I'm going to go through some examples, some recent results. Upper left side is the Arlington Mill apartment complex. This is on the north side of Columbia Pike. It was I think it was an old Piggly Wiggly supermarket, and the county owned the land, and we did a community center on the front end, and then went through a competitive process. And there's 122 income restricted units on the back side. To the right is Colonial Village. It's near Courthouse, and this was a development that was essentially renovated with tax credits and housing fund. That Shell lower left-hand, there literally was a Shell station on the corner. I think it's Columbia Pike and Dinwiddie or something like that. You may remember that Shell station. A nonprofit bought it and tore it down and put up 83 units that are income restricted. Larkspur on the right is a market rate affordable development on Lee Highway. A nonprofit bought it, did some renovations, and it's successful. Next. So these are mixed income developments, and most of these using planning tools. The upper left, upper right, and lower left are all income restricted units through the planning process. What's interesting, the one on the Sedona Slate, there's 479 units. There's 55 CAFs. That's our acronym for income restricted units. There were about 100 and some garden apartments on that site, and the developer, I think it was JBG Smith, took them all down, and they replaced those with 55 brand new income restricted units that are mainly more multifamily. They're all 2 and 3 bedroom units, which is pretty good. And then the lower right-hand side is really kind of all the tools. Union on Queen was 50 units of garden apartments that were replaced with 179 units. We preserved 2 of the buildings and turned 20 units into 12. So we took 1-bedroom units and put them into 3-bedroom units. And then on the right side is a mixed income concrete and steel apartment tower. Next. Oops. This is all preservation. These are 4 apartment complexes that we preserved using our trust fund. The 2 on the right side, Buchanan Gardens, Buckingham Gardens and Buchanan Gardens, were used tax credits and our trust fund. And then on the left side are essentially older apartment complexes that we made loans to the nonprofit developer to purchase and preserve. Next. The future, we have the economy's changing, and there's pretty much a lot of increasing pressure on affordability. So the board kicked off what we call Housing Arlington, which is our way of intensifying our putting more energy into figuring out how to solve the affordability, and it's got 6 initiatives. We've got our land use tools that we're looking at. Housing Conservation District is one of the things we're looking at. We're starting talking about missing middle, which is kind of a form of housing that's not being produced in the marketplace, somewhere between the single-family homes in the R5 and 6 zones to the metro corridors. What are those middle income or middle housing types that we're trying to incentivize? On the financial side, it's really trying to look at how do we better leverage our existing financial resources, maybe look at some other ones. The condo initiative, like the garden apartments on the rental side, we've got a lot of garden condominiums, so that's essentially our affordable ownership stock, and trying to figure out ways to strengthen those condominium complexes. Institutional partnerships, we don't have a lot of land, and I think you're in that same situation, but there are a lot of churches, faith of community, there's community serving institutions like a Red Cross or American Legion. There's our own land that's either for county facilities or school facilities. We're trying to look at these more strategically to say, well, is there some role for these sites to provide some affordability? And we've got about 6 examples where we've developed, or nonprofits developed, essentially housing on church sites. We've got an American Legion that's being converted to housing with an American Legion post. We've got a Red Cross site on Route 50 that's also being converted to housing, but I think this is a really exciting partnership. County employee housing, there's a couple budget cycles ago, we had this interesting conversation about, hey, you're putting all this money into affordable housing, what about us as employees? We can't afford to live here, so the county manager and the board's asked us to sort of look at ways we can incentivize county employees to live in the county, and that you don't have to think too hard. There's other employers that we also want to talk to about this initiative. And then finally, the master plan that was adopted in 2015 is going to be 5 years old, and so it's time to update it. Next. I think the lessons learned, and this is something that, we've been doing, kind of in Arlington a long time, I think you all have been doing, is really, planning, engaging the community it's a kind of an ongoing process with us. We're always updating our plans. We're always doing small area plans, updating master plans, updating, comprehensive plan elements. The second piece is, we're not, the government can't do it all, so we've got to make sure that we're working with our partners, nonprofits, the foundations, the lending community, consultants we use, and then, we just working together, that's how we've been successful. I listed a lot of programs, but I think I'd recommend trying to keep the programs relatively simple as possible. I know, just one example, we were looking at a partial tax exemption for affordability, but in some ways, if you're working with tax policy, it's just money that doesn't come back. Why not just make loans and keep it simpler? And then the other thing that we've learned over the years is that a lot of our programs started, and as we've got experience with them, we've changed them, we've tinkered with them, we've tweaked them over time, and so I think that's kind of part of our story, is that we've got this trust fund that's evolved over the years. We've tried to make it stronger by getting, focusing on repayments. We've gone from a rolling application process to a competitive request for proposal process. But the point is, we're trying to, constantly look at our tools and make sure that they're current and looking forward to the future. So I think that's the end of my presentation, and happy to answer questions, or if you've got comments. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. This was comprehensive and filled with a lot of information. Any comments from the commission regarding what we heard?
Just, I share those comments. It's very comprehensive. Thank you for its excellent work that you're doing there. Can you describe a little more what the Housing Conservation District does? How do you apply that?
So we did. It's been a two-step process. First of all, we were looking. We've got lots of plans in the county. In fact, Columbia Pike was the last one where we had about 6,000 non-income restricted units that we tried to preserve, and then it essentially came down to, we were looking at what's the existing affordable rental stock that's at risk. And so we looked at these. There's about 12 areas in the county. There's along Lee Highway, kind of adjacent to the metro corridors in parts of South and Arlington that are not part of those planning areas. And so we created a district. It's called the Housing Conservation District over all of those 12 areas into one big district. And the first thing we did, but in addition to identifying those units, is we took townhouses as a matter of right of way. So if you can do townhouses, but you have to go through the special exception process. Because I think that it was seen as one of the threats to the garden apartments from an affordability perspective. From a form, you're taking a multifamily form, replacing it with more of a single-family form. So that was one thing we did. And then since then, we've been trying to figure out. We're in this. I won't use this term, but if you talk to property owners and developers, they want this housing conservation district to provide a lot of incentives to do more density. But if you talk to the neighbors that are around those garden apartments, they want less density. So we're trying to figure out what's that right mix of preservation versus redevelopment that we can try and incentivize through a zoning tool. So that's where we are right now in trying to figure out what that I don't want to say sweet spot, but what's that compromise that provides enough financial incentive through increased development rights to make it worthwhile to preserve some affordability, but not too much that it's disruptive to the surrounding communities. And so
So by declaring it a district, then you're allowed to do those, to apply those additional tools?
Right, and we're just in this formation of figuring out what those tools are.
I see.
Whether they're zoning tools, again, we're looking at we've got it right now in the books, there's a partial tax exemption for renovation, but there's no affordability requirement in there, so we're looking at that. We're trying to figure out what are the range of tools, mainly land use, but also some financial tools that we can incentivize some preservation of affordability. I'm not sure if that helps, but.
Yep, that's great. Just one more, just quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
The revised parking standards
Right.
you mentioned?
Yep.
How do you apply?
So those are in the metro corridors, and it's not completely finished, but for example, there's a development that went through the special exception process in Ballston, right across from the metro station, and the parking ratio there is 0.4 because it's got income-restricted units. So I think I was 140-some units, and they got rather than putting 144 parking spaces, it was closer to 50, 40 or 50. It's quite low. But I think the idea here is that because parking is so expensive, and the more grade you go down, the more expensive it gets. If we can kind of right-size that parking, and if you're locating a development where you've got lots of transit options, whether it's the metro, the bus, the bike, sidewalks, so on, we hope in locations where there's multi-modes of transportation, you don't have to provide as many parking spaces.
So you're kind of using it as a reverse density bonus. Instead of giving a bonus for providing additional units, you're relaxing the requirements to provide parking.
Right, and we are increasing the density as well, so they're kind of getting both. But
Do you find developers prefer one or the other? Increased density bonuses or reduced parking?
I think the former. And that's a conversation.
Anything else? Mr. Stevens, yeah.
Yeah, a question about accessory dwelling units. We're very much on the front end of discussing that here as far as what changes we can make to our zoning tools to expand capabilities. I'm just wondering, did you have a particular model in mind as you looked at especially the detached units, other places that maybe have done this?
Yeah, thank you. That's a good question. Yeah, we looked at a lot of places. I think the place that sticks out in mind from a design perspective is Santa Cruz, California. They've got a whole, we looked at them from a distance and then went out there. I went out there, it was kind of a holiday and it was just a little side trip. And they've got a whole design manual of 5 or 6, 7 prototypes of detached accessory dwellings. The city of Portland and city of Seattle, there are other places that have done a lot of these. I think our experience is we got a lot of feedback back in 2008, that concern about character, concern about parking, concerns you can think of, what about tree canopy and so on. So I think our accessory dwellings have evolved rather slowly. I think we're not getting the production we'd like to get, but I think, we started with the interior accessory dwellings, and then we got to expand them, and now we've got the detached, and so hopefully over time, as we make these changes and neighbors see that it's okay.
Doesn't destroy the neighborhood.
It doesn't, right, your word.
Yeah.
But I think that's a concern, and so we've tried to, I think it's I came from tonight, this notion of what's the alternative to somebody tearing down a smaller house and putting up a bigger house. We'd like to think accessory dwellings at least are one option. So you could, rather than tear it down, you could create a new unit that's produces income. You could age in place there. If you've got a relative or daughter that wants to live there, but at least it's an option.
Yeah.
We'd like to get the production up. So, but again, we looked at other examples throughout the country where they have been they've got them at scale.
Do you track the results in terms of to what degree it contributes to more affordable housing options?
I think, yeah, it's interesting that, we don't have an affordable requirement on those. I think it's just a way of expanding supply. And it doesn't, I think there's this, and I know, I don't struggle with that. I mean, my business is housing affordability, and sometimes it's not income restricting. It's just if you're increasing options, that is helping affordability in a kind of broader sense.
Yeah, because that's one of my questions was, because I think if you have these accessory dwellings and they end up being the same price as the market price apartments that are not affordable
Right.
at, even, I mean, they seem to me that if most of the market rate apartments, the newer ones we have, they're above 100% AMI in some ways. So it's like, so why are, we add these new units, but they're not affordable. But then I think one value is if they do help someone stay under their home longer, maybe. But, someone who is in that situation can't afford to build an additional dwelling, so it's gonna be,
Right.
so just, I don't know. I kind of wonder what, in the long term, if it really does increase affordable housing. It may increase choices.
Right. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's probably the latter in that case, because I think it is, again, we've had this debate. I think we're gonna, I told the staff person I think he's gone through 3 of these iterations, that he needs to get ready for the next iteration. Because I think it needs to evolve, I think, but as you say, we're trying to expand choices. It may or may not be, affordable in the affordable sense, but at least it's more affordable than a new market rate unit that's in the new concrete and steel buildings.
I mean, and you wonder if, I just think that in some cases, they may be more expensive because someone would prefer to be in the neighborhood than in a building. But, I mean, we're in the process of adding a lot more apartments because we really had a big gap there. But what's interesting to me is we're getting a new duplex. We've had the ability to do duplexes for a long time, and no one has ever done them. So I think, to me, that's actually kind of creative, too.
No, that's great. I think, and we're seeing the same things, a similar thing in Arlington, where we've seen a couple of, brand-new duplexes. So again, they may not be, because the lots are so expensive, they may not be income restricted, they may not be affordable to that, that lower income range or moderate income range, but at least it's 2 units instead of 1. And so instead of maybe instead of a $1.5 million house, maybe it's 2 $800,000 units. Again, it's not affordable in our sense, but at least it's adding to stock that wasn't there before.
Yeah, I think they're probably going to be $1 million each or something, but
Yeah.
so they're definitely not going to be affordable. But it is interesting to see someone actually use that code.
Yeah, and I think we're trying to, again, this missing middle where, this is, to us, is we're trying to get into this, we know the model pretty well on the income restricted or affordable side, and, we're going to be playing catch up for the rest of our lives, but at least there's this notion of what about the form that's not being produced between the single family homes and the high-rise apartments, that is that duplex or triplex or smaller apartment buildings that may or may not be income restricted affordable, but it may be a lower price point that meets a demand that's, right now there's not a supply that's being produced, at least not where we are.
I have a couple questions. So you mentioned that your developers get to pick units or cash, and I think you said they usually pick cash. And I think I don't know that we don't give developers a choice, but that's sometimes they've picked cash sometimes, or if it's worked out that it's cash. And I think that, and I'm not an expert on this, but I've heard some of the newer buildings we have, they have affordable units, and sometimes we have trouble filling them because of how they're priced or how that all works. But is there a model where, and I don't know that this would be smart, but is there a model where you go to a development that exists that has some 6% affordable units, and you say to whoever owns that now, hey, can we sell these back to you? We actually like cash now because we want to go do something else. Is that ever done? Is that possible?
We haven't had that situation.
Yeah.
If you're saying they've got income restricted units and they can't fill them, and then,
Yeah, and if we have a new approach where we need cash, like we want to go buy a building or help a nonprofit,
I mean,
finance a building.
yeah, we don't have that in our ordinance, but I can imagine, I mean,
It's sort of like retroactively, like, hey, I know you guys gave us units, but actually we would like the cash. I'm wondering, I'm just trying to think like, how to fund some of these ideas that we have. Which brings me to another thing. A big challenge we have, which you guys probably don't have, or at least not to the extent we do, is that we don't have a particularly large commercial tax base, and we have a very popular school system, which is expensive to provide because we don't have the economies of scale, all that stuff. And so for me, one of the big areas where we lack affordable housing is for families, and one of the challenges is even if we could figure out a way to pay to create those, it's like a double whammy because then it's particularly expensive for those people to move into the city, which I want us to figure out a way to do. And so it's funny, a lot of the things that we can do they almost have two costs to them. And one of the things that has come up, and you said you guys have the transfer of development rights, which hasn't been used very often, but I keep trying to think of, if we could take single-family homes, which are expensive for us because they often have school kids, and we have lots of them, somehow take those out of the mix and replace them with a similar number of people in townhouses or affordable units. And it seems like a transfer of development rights is a way that you could do that, right? Like if somehow you could acquire the right, like, hey, this is, Jim Snyder's big thing is take a house that's in a floodplain, somehow get rid of that house, transfer those development rights somewhere else so that no house ever goes back there. Now we've removed a single-family home and we've created, spaces for people somewhere else in an affordable way. I don't know, it seems complicated and hard to figure out how to get something like that started, but it seems like, unlike like Arlington, where it doesn't really matter if you guys take, McMansions off the market, but like if we could figure out a way to get rid of some of those, but obviously they're expensive, so we can't just buy them.
I wonder where they would go if you.
Yeah, I mean,
people
increased
go.
density somewhere or something like that. I mean, I think. But yeah, I think that's our big challenge is even if we had the money to create, affordable housing for families, then we also have the money to send those kids to school. I hope we do. I mean, I think we just have to raise our taxes to do it. But that is the challenge. When we look at all this, I keep telling people, like, we've got to be realistic about this. Even if we could figure out how to bring this online, someone's got to do the math to figure out how we're going to support it long term.
Right, and the discussion we had tonight was that, so we've got this set of finance tools and land use tools, and we're trying to, I mean, the kind of simple perspective is that we're using most of our financial resources on people with the least amount of money. So we are putting, tax dollars into income restricted units that are, helping households that are earning less than $65,000. And the pressure we're getting is that, well, what about the households that are making, $15, $20 an hour? So they're only making $30,000, $40,000 a year. It's expensive to subsidize that through the tax credit program, through our trust fund, but that's really it's probably the most direct way to get there. On the land use side, it's just, we use our land use tools for more of the 60% units, and we're hoping that through the, kind of this missing middle study in Housing Conservation District, that it'll be the land use tools that'll provide the incentives and, if you will, development rights that'll support more moderate priced
Right.
housing.
Yeah.
And I don't know that, and I think this is pretty true across the country. I don't know anybody that's been able to do really affordable housing, again, particularly for low incomes, without some form of money, whether it's rental assistance or,
Totally.
in our case, where you're making, capital, essentially loans.
Right.
And we've just, I guess we've been lucky in Arlington to have a fairly strong advocacy community
Yeah.
that's kind of pushed.
Yeah, you kept mentioning all these nonprofits building apartment buildings, and I'm like, yeah, I'd love one of those. And then my last comment is just, unlike Arlington, like, we literally have no space. We got 2.2 square miles. It's not like, and it's an interesting challenge because I think, you know, it's awkward to say this because it comes across wrong, but, you know, if someone works at our grocery store and lives, you know, half a mile away in Fairfax County or Arlington County, to me, that's a community, that's fine. And so I've often wondered, are there ways to partner with our neighbors to create affordable housing within some geographic area that's reasonable? But, and I actually think that's why I would love it if we could focus on the family aspect, because for me, like, one of the things I would love to have is more diversity in our schools. And so the focus on affordable housing, I think, for families inside the city limits is important. I think workforce housing, those are kind of housing, it can be more of a regional thing, because I think those people can still participate in the community in a sort of authentic way. But the school system is really, to me, where you get the biggest benefit of the diversity. And so I don't know how we have a bunch of advocates in the city. It's challenging to get them to put their money where their mouth is.
I mean, I couldn't have said it any better, so. No, but I think you're right. I mean, I think there's an interest at the regional level, and I know we had, there's a work session between the county board and the city of Alexandria, and there's this idea of trying to create some organization that can be together, that can do things jointly, and I know there's I think the economic development folks in Northern Virginia gotten together, so there is this interest in trying to figure out how do we, this is it's an Alexandria, Arlington, Falls Church, Manassas, Fairfax County, Prince William, Loudoun County issue. Is there some way of working together that we can figure this out?
Yeah, see if Amazon can throw some money into that, right?
Just wanted to support the idea of regional collaboration, because it's going to be something that's hard for Falls Church to solve on our own, since it's not just a regional but a national problem. So I like the idea of collaboration. But with respect to missing middle housing, I'm just wondering, when you think about more accessory dwelling units or duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, what are you seeing in terms of mortgage lenders being willing to lend money for that? Is that a barrier at all? Are they able to kind of get their heads around that?
I don't think so. Again, we've got a lot in Arlington. There's a lot of, I guess they're called side-by-sides. Essentially, they're fee simple, so they're 2 units. So it's I guess it's not a duplex. It's a side-by-side. You've got a line running, right down the middle of them. I'm trying to think of how that would be an issue. I know, for example, you can get, there's a fairly good, lending community for condominiums. So there is this kind of, I don't think, I'm not aware of that. This would be a problem, what you're talking about from a lending perspective. I think in our case, we're looking at, how do we incentivize it? How do we get we're having this conversation with the community over the next probably take us about a year to get through this, in terms of how to, what is the, what's the word? Capacity, interest, to have different forms that are, that are not single-family homes. And that's going to be a challenge. Again, because we have the experience with accessory dwellings, and if we've got feedback around that, kind of what you're talking about, you can imagine what that might be like. But I don't think we have a choice. I don't think, again, and you mentioned the regional issue, I think we have to figure out, how to add the supply, and some of that supply has got to be at a lower price point. It may not be income restricted, but I think we got to figure that out. So, thanks. Wish us luck.
Anything else? No, all right. Thank you. I'm jealous of all the tools you have. We have some of these, but and there's certainly been just some discussion about adding more. But Arlington has done really a nice job of giving yourself lots of options to try to address what we have been presented as a real crisis in the region, and it's an impressive package that you're able to offer these people at this point.
Thanks for having me, and you know where I am. I'm happy to help, and we don't have any pride and ownership, so take what you need.
Yeah.
And
well,
again,
it
we're
takes
happy to help.
I mean, I think we will try to, of course, but it just takes time. You guys have been at it for a long time, as you showed, and it's enviable that you have addressed it so much earlier. I mean, we had it at one point, but
Right.
we have not been able to keep up. It's been pretty clear that we're doing our best, trying to preserve our current housing, and trying to add has just been a really
Sure.
slow process for us.
Well, we're glad you are. Again, this is something that we're kind of in this together as a region, so everybody's, trying to do their part, and so keep going.
Yeah,
Good
well,
luck.
thank you. You guys are doing a great job, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Let's move on to the information items. 7A, Planning Commissioner reports. Any reports?
Can I make a request here?
Sure.
No, Paul's not paying attention. I'd like to officially request Wi-Fi for City Hall before our next planning commission meeting. I'd like that in the minutes. I get a second from the audience. I have another question. I'll ask Paul later because it's a Paul question related to traffic calming plan on my street that my neighbors keep asking me about.
Any other planning commission reports while we wait for Mr. Stoddard?
Well, I could do two, but let me just do one in the interest of time. The ESC met last week, and it was the last public input opportunity on the update to the environment for everyone as part of the comprehensive plan update. So that process, that part of the process is now complete. Staff and Kate Walker is in the process of compiling all of the various comments to come up with the final draft that will be presented to us, I believe, in a couple of weeks. And that's in preparation for our recommendation to City Council, so.
All right, thank you.
Hey, Paul, since you're back, my understanding is there's a traffic calming project slated for Little Falls and West Columbia, which is my front yard, which is cool. But my neighbor who's been running it has the person he's been in touch with trying to get updates has kind of gone dark. Do you know the status of general traffic calming stuff and whether or not that specific project has been funded?
So the two traffic calming projects that are active are Annandale and Gundry, which just had a very well-received community meeting about how to reconfigure that intersection. It's in the Winter Hill neighborhood. It would be taking away that slip lane, taking away what was designed as something of a high-speed interchange and turning it into a neighborhood intersection with a narrowed-down T intersection and crosswalks, lighting. The other project that is still active is Little Falls and Great Falls. I think the expectation is to try and get Annandale and Gundry into construction
Yeah,
quickly.
I'm not like pressing for it, I just mostly look for it, but Little Falls and Great Falls, is that different from Little Falls and West Columbia where it's a T intersection? I'm told the dream is to build a bump out sidewalk and crosswalk and.
That's part of it.
Okay.
I'm sorry, so when I say Little Falls and Great Falls, I don't mean
That
just that
geographic,
intersection, I
okay.
mean those two
Okay.
streets. Yeah.
All right, so that, and it's got funding if we get the other thing done? I mean, I haven't been involved with it, I just,
Yeah, there's funding available in the neighborhood traffic calming program for the next few years anyway
Okay.
through federal grant that passes through the state. It was about $600,000. Local funds are being used to prioritize the Annandale and Gundry project, whatever's remaining. If there's enough, obviously, we want to do projects with local dollars first. They're faster and more flexible. And then those federal dollars are there as a backstop for anything that can't get completed with local dollars. And then after that, it'll be up to the CIP to keep funding.
reload it, yeah, okay, thank you.
All right, any other planning commission reports? All right, let's move on then to correspondence, which I didn't see any.
Just one update under the director's report. Just as a reminder, I think there's a flyer on the dais. This Saturday is the community meeting for the restart of the West End Small Area Plan. This is looking at the 3 planning opportunity areas at the west end of the city, west of the W&OD Trail. It, of course, includes the 34 acres that are the subject of the 10-acre private development in the new high school. Of course, the plan for that area is relatively fixed at this point. The other areas that are more open are what's shaded in purple and blue. Shaded in purple, the area north of Route 7 is generally the Falls Plaza Shopping Center with the giant grocery store. And the drugstore and the Staples. And then south of that area, highlighted in blue, is the city's property yard, as well as the Bayer Automotive properties, as well as a number of other properties in the area. And so this is an opportunity to look at how could these areas, especially those areas along 7 that are between the 10-acre site and the Founders Road, develop over time, given that they are in a fairly consolidated property ownership. It's adjacent to the West Falls Church Metro, and of course Fairfax County is entertaining their own comprehensive plan amendment for properties controlled by Virginia Tech and WMATA and UVA. The expected timeline is that it would be similar to other small area planning efforts with a kickoff, engage the community early about conversations for redevelopment concepts, hold a work session with the Planning Commission, revise the draft, go out to the community again, go out to the boards and commissions, and hopefully bring back something for final action fairly quickly, hopefully less than a year.
Okay. And in terms of other correspondence, we did get a thank you note from the, from Evan Goldman and the EYA staff for our work with them on this project, and they look forward to working with us again in the future. There's more, you can see it, but that's the gist. Okay, we also have a director's report, or that sort of constituted it?
That was most of it. The only other item I had was that the city will be presenting at NAOP, which is in a commercial development real estate professional group that's active in the area. The city will be providing a presentation on public-private partnership with, of course, the highlight on the 34-acre site. This is another example of Falls Church, I think, in many ways punching above its weight in terms of ingenuity. Certainly the recent awards the city's won for the Northside Social Project, Railroad Cottages Project, I think 301 at Tinner Hill, Lincoln at 301 West Broad, Lincoln at Tinner Hill. These projects are trend-setting within the region, and I think this is another example where folks are looking to the city of Falls Church as a positive example of how to rebuild school infrastructure, which is of course expensive and certainly a deserving public good.
All right, I agree. We're amazing. All right, that's it?
I have a question for our director there.
Sure. I'm sorry I didn't ask.
Oh, it's all right. So I'm hearing that Insight is reworking Broad and Washington, so that they've been meeting with people in Lawton, and that they are considering, or are talking to the city about buying our parking lot that's behind them to integrate into the project. So what, is that for a parking garage, or what were, I mean, are they looking to make this project that much bigger? Do you, I mean, when are, I guess they haven't, I mean, I know they're in negotiations right now for redoing this, and then it has to come back for first reading and all that fun stuff again. But
Right, so staff has been talking to the Insight Group about potential redevelopment or a reconfiguration or reapplication of what was proposed for the site. The development group has not met with city council yet. There was a closed session, but that was only entertained by council and city staff. There's been no formal application, but of course, since the project area that's being considered would extend into the city lot, it would be a new application because the land area that's being considered is larger than what was considered before.
yeah, I mean, everything I'm hearing is just from neighbors on Lawton, and that they're asking, what's the next step? And I'm like, well, they have to reapply. So.
Right, they
Okay.
would have to reapply. I think city staff is of the opinion that it would be a new special exception because the land area is larger than it was before. Of course, there's already been the community conversation about what that project building, what that project face would look like along Lawton. And I think that the applicant team is well aware of that and would want to stick to those constraints.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, How long ago was it? I mean, they're starting to time out for doing a site plan anyway, because don't they get 2 years?
Special exceptions run for 3 years.
3 years, okay. Then they have more time than I thought.
Any other questions? All right, we have no, moving on then to item 8, we have no work session items, and then we are adjourned.